Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean go solo live? Have you ever been asked why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Hi, everyone. It's time for Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy my conversation with Sherry Ott as she shares about her stories walking through Spain, as well as an amazing project she has that she'll share more about at the end of our podcast today. And today we have Sherry Ott joining us from Ott's World. Welcome, Sherry.
Hello.
And where in the U.S. are you currently located?
I'm currently coming to you from Denver, Colorado.
Excellent. You guys just got a little snow out there.
Oh my gosh. When I arrived here last week, there was like a foot of snow on the ground. Crazy.
It's ridiculous. So this won't be airing until June, but we're in May right now recording it. And to see that, I have a lot of friends out in Denver. Yeah. So do you love to be in Denver in the cold?
Well, I actually don't live here, but I'm here for about 3 weeks or so, just working and writing. And but I do love Denver because I'm a mountain person. So just the idea of having the mountains out there that I can see makes me pretty happy.
Well, that's awesome. And you can tell that she's an mountain person by looking at the heading on her Ott's World website. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go along our time today. But the reason that we've asked you to join us, Sherry, is to share a little bit about some of your solo travel adventures. Yes?
Yeah, I have lots of them.
That's awesome. I'm excited to hear that. Why don't we start with, we're going to focus on one of your travels across Spain on the Camino de Santiago. But before we get into what that adventure was like, give us a little backstory. Where were you at in your life when you decided to embark?
Ooh, well, there's a couple of embarks. So let me back up a little bit. So in 2006, I had a corporate job. I'd worked in IT for 14 years, I believe. And I was burned out and I needed a break and needed time to think and I wanted to travel. And so back in 2006, I decided I was going to take a career break. Actually, I decided it probably in 2004 and planned. And I took off in 2006 to travel around the world. I quit my job, travel around the world. Which back then was not a common story that you hear that often. Now it is, which is interesting. But I did that. I traveled to 23 countries solo. I had never traveled that much before. I got a passport when I was 30 years old. So I was new to the whole travel world.
Absolutely.
And it was terrifying, but within a few months, I was hooked and on it. And after that, I actually ended up staying out for about 16 months for that first time. And I decided pretty early on that I did not want to go back to my old IT career and my old life. And that I really had this addiction to experiencing something new every day. And I wanted to keep going. So then it was a matter of, well, how do I make a living and travel? Which is the question everyone wants to know.
That is real.
Yes. So now it's 2007, basically, 2007, 2008. And I decided I would teach ESL because I thought that was the only thing I could do to make money at the time. So I went and I lived in Vietnam for a year by myself, which was a big challenge. And eventually I had this whole website from the moment I left back in 2006. And the world was changing really fast in the world of digital media. And all of a sudden, the term blogger, all entered our vocabulary, and this became somewhat of a viable career. And I was positioned because I had just been doing this and I had all these followers, but I didn't really know what to do. Like that was never my intention. So to make it a shorter story, I became a travel blogger and then have been doing that for 10 years. So the Camino de Santiago, I did it in 2012. So this was just kind of one of many different kind of epic adventures. I call them epic adventures.
Absolutely.
I started to do because after I've literally been traveling now for 10 years. And once you start to do all of that, it's great in the beginning, but you also start to get kind of, this sounds weird, but bored with regular travel. And so I started coming up with all of these things that really fed my soul, these epic adventures. And the Camino was one of them. There are many. And so I kind of would get into these longer kind of things that I would do. And someone had just told me about the Camino, I think. And I thought, oh, that's intriguing, walking across Spain. I'll, set that aside and think about that. And then I found myself in Spain on another project, and I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to go do this. I knew nothing about it. I really didn't. And sure enough, I went to Pamplona. I actually started in Pamplona, and I left my hotel and started walking without much knowledge at all of how to do it or what it was about. So I learned along the way. So that's actually, it was just one of these things that was I thought it would be a really great way to slow down. I thought it would be really great to write about. I thought it would be a great challenge for me. So that's what got me there, really.
Well, so I'm going to take a back step because I have a local meetup group, and we just got together after the Women in Travel Summit with Wonderful, just concluded here in the Milwaukee area a couple weeks ago. And my meetup group is, probably what we were, if we'd say before, right? Now, I'm not a travel blogger, but there are these women out there who are seeking something different. They're seeking sort of that great adventure. They definitely want to have other experiences. And we've mentioned the word blog to them in the past, and it almost seems like a foreign language. And that idea of even like, where would I even start? So I'd love for you to, go back to the days when it wasn't as big as it is right now, and somebody who's just getting inspiration about possibly making notes of their travel journeys. And what are your thoughts about where somebody would even start?
Oh boy. Yeah, I kind of accidentally fell into it because I liked writing and I liked sharing my stories. It's a whole different world now, but I think you start by first getting used to writing down your thoughts.
Sure.
Right. So I came from back when I worked in corporate, I was a journaler. I would write in journals. I had 7 years of journals.
That's awesome.
So they were horrible writing, but they were just, they were for me. And if you actually go back and look at the first 2 years of my blog, the writing is horrible too, but it didn't really matter back then. I think it's really just about getting thoughts down on paper or getting, starting to get used to writing. And then the next step though, is really starting to think about, what do you want to focus on? Now, back when I started in 2006, that wasn't as important because there weren't that many people doing this. Just the fact that I was out there doing all these crazy fun things,
right,
as a single female was excitement enough for people. But now you don't want to go too far down the line before you start figuring out, like, what is my focus? Is it going to be female travel? Is it going to be inspirational? Is it going to be everything about Thailand? Is it going to be everything over 40, boomer travel? Like, you need to start to hone in on what is it that I really want to write about.
Got it.
Once you can figure that out, mine, I would say now, because I've had to kind of hone in my stuff, is probably adventure travel. Once you figure that out, then everything starts to form from there. Because there's a lot more to blogging than just writing. There's so much behind the scenes that's happening, and so much also even technology. I mean, I don't want to scare people off because I learned it. And,
right.
It's all learnable. There's all kinds of groups now that'll, help you through it and all that kind of stuff. But it is much more than just writing. If I think about how much time I spend writing versus doing all the other stuff, writing is probably only 20%, which is crazy.
Well, and so that's the interesting part too, is that's where you move from capturing my stories and wanting to share my stories with the world, which is wonderful, to then, how do I get paid to do this? And, how can I turn this into a lifestyle and career?
Yeah. And I, once again, because of timing, I kind of fell into it all and I learned as I went and so on. Now, today, that, like I said, though, honing in on what it is that your main topic is going to be, what are you about? What is this website about? Is going to drive everything else.
Right.
And as far as making money means that you have to also be, and for females, I think this is really kind of hard sometimes. It's hard for me sometimes. You have to be good at promoting yourself. You have to be comfortable, being confident, and promote yourself. And you have to pitch yourself and ask for money. Otherwise, you're never going to get paid. And when you pitch yourself and you pitch ideas to destinations or brands or small travel companies, having that niche, having that focus, like I am about adventure travel, I'm about epic adventures to intriguing places, like that right there starts to hone in everything.
Absolutely.
And that's how you form your pitch. But I do think it's important because I think, I'm in all these different blogging groups. I spoke at WITS last year.
Okay.
And for women bloggers, we have trouble pitching ourselves. And that's one of the biggest challenges. So, and that's been, like I said, it's been a challenge for me, but I think, you grow that skill. And I think it's a great skill to be able to talk confidently about what you can do and why you deserve X amount of dollars for what you can.
Well, so this is just a tip of the iceberg, and I'd love to do more about blogging, but we want to get into the travels. So let's start talking about Camino.
Yeah.
Tell me, so we've given us a little bit of the background on where you were at.
Mm-hmm. Start
talking about the adventures along the way.
Oh, well, first, the Camino de Santiago is it's technically a religious pilgrimage across Spain. And the whole idea is you walk across Spain on this route that's very well marked, and you end in Santiago and Santiago de Compostela, and it's a church there, and that's where the body of St. James is buried and interned. So that's the idea. And it used to be that people from all over Europe would come. There's routes that go from Belgium to Santiago to, whatever. They would take this pilgrimage. That's kind of the history. And they would go. And the whole idea is you were relieved of your sins if you made this pilgrimage. That's the Compostela part. So there's all of that. Now, I am not a religious person whatsoever.
Sure.
So I didn't walk it for that. I walked it because I'm like, hey, walking across Spain, that sounds really cool.
Right.
Can I do it? Do I have the ability to do it? Will I go crazy? Can I do it alone? Like, I get really, really excited by challenges like that when I think I can do it. Like, I think I'm capable, but I don't know. And it's that journey of like discovering and overcoming that really propels me, I would say. So I wasn't doing it for religious reasons.
Sure.
I appreciated everyone's reasons why they were doing it, but I just wanted to do it to walk it. I would say the adventure started on day one. When I left my hotel, I did have a company that moved my bags for me. So because I was on the road for months, I had all these other bags and I couldn't carry all that weight. So there are companies that actually, you leave your bag in a hotel, they pick it up and they move it to where you say you're going to be at the end of the day.
Okay, that's helpful.
Oh, extremely. So that way you can only take a day pack and maybe carry, say, 10 pounds at the most, and it's much easier on you.
Nice.
So, and there's no, what do I want to say? Planned route. I mean, you follow the route, but you can do it any way you want. You can walk 5 miles that day, or you can walk 25 miles.
Cool.
It's up to you and your time. The itinerary is yours.
Sure. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I, not knowing anything about it, that's where the first adventure came. I left that hotel room and I left my big backpack in that hotel with a note on it for the luggage company. And I thought, this is weird. I'm walking out of this hotel without my stuff.
Right.
And I don't really know where I'm going, and I'm all alone.
Right.
It was the strangest feeling leaving that hotel for the first time, I got to say. But it didn't take me long. I found the path, and there are people on the path all the time. So then you know that you're in the right place.
Right.
There's these yellow arrows that you follow the whole time, and you get really good at seeing them. But the day one adventure was really just kind of going, oh, what is this about? And meeting people. it was an adventure because I think I probably walked about 18 miles that first day or something. I ended up with blisters.
I was going to say,
like, it was just.
That sounds a little crazy. Amazing, but crazy.
But the one thing to know is that it's not like a hike. I want to be clear on that. It is a walk. You're not scrambling over things.
Okay.
Normally it's farm trails that you're walking on. So it's just like little gravel roads and things like that. There is a few sections that you get up a little bit higher in altitude, but it's still not like scramble hiking.
Sure.
So yes, so you could walk long distances in a day. I think my average was somewhere probably between 17 and 23 miles a day.
So what did a typical day look like for you?
Oh, it was so simple. That's what I loved about it. It was simply about, you got up, you had I normally had a small breakfast at the little albergue that you stay in. An albergue is it's kind of like a big dorm. So it's bunk beds of all pilgrims.
Oh,
everyone walking. Yeah. But super cheap, like €10 a night. It's the one thing about the Camino de Santiago is I always say it's the cheapest way to travel through Europe.
Okay.
It is, without a doubt, but you got to do it on your own 2 feet.
Well, that is a trade-off.
You can stay in these albergues. They're all over along the trail, which are like these dorms. So you get up, go to the shared bathroom, get ready, have a little bit of coffee and breakfast there. And then I would start out walking. And I would normally walk to about the first town. And the towns are normally about roughly 5 miles apart.
Okay.
Give or take.
So you were alone, but you were never like in this isolated, I mean, even with people on the trail, but there were also communities along the way.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because you stayed in a community each night. So that's how you could decide, like, do I want to walk 5 miles today or do I want to walk 25? Just depending on how many towns you were going to go through and what town you were going to stop at the end.
Got it.
And no, you were never, ever alone. You could walk alone, but always, it's kind of like New York. There's always people around in a way, not quite that many. But that's why I think it's like the ultimate trip to do as a solo female, because there is no fear of being alone. There really isn't.
Okay.
If you want to walk with people, it's easy. You just start talking to them and you can walk with them for miles, probably, if you get along. If you don't want to walk with someone, you just kind of go off on your own and do your own pace. It's so easy. But then every night there's all these people in the albergues and you sit and you talk to them and you make all these friendships, and it's just a really fascinating way to travel, especially as a solo traveler. But yeah, the average day I'd stop and I'd have some breakfast at a village, go on. I would normally just like stop at a little shop and pick up tuna and crackers and some apples and stuff to have for lunch. Stop whenever, take my boots off or take my shoes off. Foot management. You learn foot management really quickly, which I didn't the first day.
Right.
So let the feet kind of air out, take a little rest. And then you'd normally get into the village. I'd try to get into the village that I wanted to stay at, whatever that was, by about 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
Okay.
So otherwise it gets a little hot. And find an albergue, go there, shower, go to dinner. It's normally early, 7, which is really unusual for Spain, because Spain you eat at like 11 o'clock.
Right.
You go to dinner, and all of these towns, because they're along the Camino, they have a pilgrim's meal. So you can get a 4-course meal for normally 10 to 12 euro.
Wow.
Yeah. And you're starving. And it's always, there's an appetizer that's normally like pasta or something, or salad.
Sure.
There's normally a fish or meat with potato. There's a dessert and a whole bottle of wine.
Well, good.
All of that for like 12 euro.
Wow. Okay, so like you said, very affordable. Mm-hmm. So tell me about some of the people that you're meeting along the way in the stories.
They are so amazing. One cool thing for me, that first day, I met 2 people that I ended up ending with, and I'm still friends with to this day, but I ended the trip with them. But we didn't always walk together. We just kind of ebb and flow and whatever. But one of them turned out to just be such a dear friend. We just had a lot in common. So she was from the UK. We were around the same age at the time. So, you meet people like that, but then you also meet people you meet people that are doing it for religious reasons, which is really fascinating to me. Like, I always
Awesome.
wanted to kind of learn about that and why they were doing it. You meet people who are doing it for, what would I say? Like, there's been a trauma or some big thing that happened in their life. You meet a lot of those. So you hear some really gut-wrenching stories too. And I think the other cool thing is, like I said earlier, it's the cheapest way to travel through Europe. And even though you're just going through Spain, you're really not, because you are meeting people from every corner of the world there.
Yes.
Like, I can't even tell you, I probably should have kept track of how many countries, but so you really do get this crazy diversity of the type of people. Most of the people I would say were middle age
Okay.
that I met. I would have been in my early 40s, 42, I think, when I walked it. There were a lot of people my age, but then a lot older, like up into their 60s, because it's doable. It's a walk. It's kind of like long distance running.
Sure.
In fact, it's just long distance walking. I mean, it's not that hard.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been studying, and that is kind of my current passion project, has to do with those folks who are out there traveling kind of for the sake of healing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're running into a bunch of those stories out there.
Yes. I could have written a whole book about just that, those people
Okay.
that you run into. It is known, I think, it's one of those kind of famous pilgrimages that's known for that too. And because it also has a little bit of religious connotation to it, I think, it attracts all of that too. But yeah, and for me, so it took me 5 weeks to walk the whole thing. And I took one day off a week to rest my body and do some work and writing.
Sure.
But if you walk the whole thing, it gives you an immense amount of time to think and process everything. And that's what you do. And I did it less for the physical kind of activity and more for I call it like a mental vacation. It was probably the best therapy I could ever have, was just sitting there and walking and meeting people and thinking and walking and walking and walking. It breaks your whole life down into this simplicity of, I eat, I sleep, I walk. And there are no other distractions. That's what makes it so beautiful.
Everybody there was kind of in that place as well, or, so often I think of a lot of travel, especially, this was a little while ago, so technology was still a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I feel like so often, and especially coming from the American perspective, that one of the things that we try to do when we travel is to create home somewhere else. And this sounds like the exact opposite of that experience. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, this is not home. And it wasn't for me, certainly. I'm trying to think if people could really, I don't think so. I mean, no, this was all, for me at least, and I think most people there, was all really about new experiences. And you didn't see it. And yes, this was 2012, but you didn't see people on phones. You saw a lot of cameras.
Sure.
So I suppose it would be a little bit different now. But even back then, actually, I had a smartphone and I was using it to find albergues, to find places, to find my way. I had a little program on it that had different like albergues and information and stuff like that. There's a bunch of different apps out there, even back then.
Okay.
But I found, even for me, it's hard to speak for others, but for me, even on these really long days, like when the rain would be pouring down, that's the thing too, is you can't escape the elements.
Right.
You become this kind of one with nature because of that. It was pouring rain, and it was just a heck of a hike, and it was muddy and made it harder. But I normally am someone that would listen to podcasts and listen to music. I think in that whole 5 weeks, I turned on my iPod once.
Wow.
Because I started getting used to the idea of silence and just kind of listening to what was around me and using that time to think and kind of meditate in a way, I suppose. And I really liked it because I had not done that before. So this was nothing about my normal life. This was really about kind of pushing me, but I didn't start out with that goal. It just all kind of happened. I loved the silence. yeah, so I don't know. I don't know how other people would look at it if they try to fall into this kind of typical routine and have all the stuff they're used to. And I don't know how you would.
Well, and that's part of the reason I'm asking is because sometimes it's helpful to actually find the situations where you can't.
Yeah, I love to put myself in those situations, like because I'm a blogger and I'm always online. My whole life in business is about being online. And just last January, I took a 28-day trip to Antarctica on a small boat.
Excellent.
Another one of those epic adventures. And that meant I was completely offline for 28 days, which terrified me because from my standpoint, that's my business, that's my livelihood. But at the same time, I knew more than ever that I needed it.
Right.
And forcing myself into that situation was the only way it was going to happen, to get offline and really kind of have that time to think again and time to process. And that's exactly what it was for me. Not only was it a great trip to Antarctica, but it made me think about things in a whole different way.
That's awesome. It makes a huge difference. And I think that for many of us, the intentionally disconnecting can be very important. It's, I don't think we really recognize how tethered we are to some of our equipment until we're in a point where it's like, okay, can I let it go? Can I go for a couple hours without it? Okay, well, I did a couple hours. And one of the most revealing things to me was as I was leading a study abroad just a couple years ago, and we take the students to a part of New Zealand where they will not get any reception. It just won't happen.
That's awesome.
So the students, after they took their moment, they processed that this was going to happen. They were pretty open to it. It actually was when they had to call their parents and say, well, we're going to be offline now. You will not be able to reach us for the next 3 days. Their parents, first, they weren't even sure that was real. Their parents were like, are you really not accessible? Or are you just saying so we don't bother you?
Mm-hmm.
And like their parents were going through a real like detachment situation that even in a way emphasized to the students how important it was for them to take that break.
Mm-hmm.
So it was unlike something that I was ever expecting to experience with, these 20-something-year-old students. But the fact that then they couldn't get online for days and life was happening, and yes, they'd still take pictures, but that they were it created so much more of a group experience because they were able to be in the moment and just doing it rather than trying to document it and capture it and, do all those proper things for social media posterity.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting dynamic in that.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's interesting even in the travel industry, since I'm very involved in it. One of the trends that I'm starting to see are these kind of digital detoxifications, right?
Nice.
In fact, I think there's a company that I love, Intrepid Travel. They do a small group tours, another great company to use for solo travel for women because you're never really alone.
Great.
Anyway, they have a whole new category called detox vacations, detox trips. Yeah. So they have so many now that they've started to group them together. So people who are looking for that, I need to unplug, they have it. There's a lot of stuff like that out there, but you do have to look a little bit. But I think it's definitely an increasing trend. It'll just more and more will happen because I think, one of the things when I left my corporate career, 2006, we didn't have smartphones. So this wasn't as much of an issue, but one of the biggest benefits that I found out of taking my career break was getting out of my day-to-day routine. Was so, so important. And traveling was great, but it was that getting out of my routine that really made me grow. It made me realize I had all these other capabilities that I hadn't really thought about. I looked at things in different ways. I became more creative. I started writing. I did photography. It led me in this whole direction. Had I not gotten out of that routine, I would have never done it.
Well, yeah, you probably would have never even realized the potential that you had to do some of those things. That's amazing.
I would have laughed at the idea of what? An IT project manager going to be a writer? No.
I love it. I love that you say that. So what was the hardest part for you?
For when I left my career or?
Well, let's talk about while you're traveling. We can absolutely come back to the when you left your career as well.
Gotcha. No, the hardest part for traveling.
And if you want to talk about the Camino specifically.
Okay. Boy, for the Camino, I don't know that I ever really had a hard time. I think the hardest part was that it ended, honestly. I was in such a zone of meeting people and this ebb and flow of this trail and the simplicity of everything. I loved it. I didn't really have any hardships. I had a lot of foot problems,
okay.
which I documented.
Yep.
But other than that, no. I think one of the hardest things about traveling, you know, and it's evolved. So when I started out, it was getting used to being alone.
Okay.
I mean, I've been alone my whole life. Like I've, you know, never been married, any of that stuff. So, but it's the idea of like traveling alone and am I going to meet people, like all those fears that you have. And so the first, you know, few months was all about dispelling that and understanding that it was really no big deal. Now I'd say my hardship is really because I've been traveling for 10 years and I don't have a home. I have a storage unit in New York City and that's it. So I've been nomadic for 10 years and homeless. And now the big challenge is how do I stay rooted?
Okay.
Which is strange because it never really bothered me until about 3 years ago. So about 7 years in, I started thinking I could feel the effects.
Okay.
Like I missed having kind of roots somewhere.
Okay.
I haven't really done anything about it yet, but
that's
I'm
okay.
still moving.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that's hard. It's hard to kind of stay grounded when you're moving all the time.
Right. So a woman who has a storage unit in New York City, it's funny because there's been times in my life where I've looked at doing some of these kinds of nomadic things. Where do you file taxes? Where is your address? Where do you get mail? Like there's a logistic question there that I'm very curious about.
Yeah, logistics are always the hard part. You need an address. You can't go through the world without an address anywhere. Yep, I tried. It didn't work. So I after a few different tries at different things, it made the most sense to use my parents' address, which is in South Dakota. And they were willing, which is really sad. I'm 47.
Right? Like, I love that.
Oh, but it works out really well. I don't get that much mail, quite frankly, but I have a place where I can fill out my taxes and get a driver's license and vote and all that stuff. Because even though I may be in the U.S. half of the year, I still have to maintain all that stuff here.
Yes.
So yeah, the logistics for me, there's all those like administrative logistics, but then the logistics of just where am I going to sleep next?
Yeah.
Can be so exhausting after a while. It's really fun and it's great. So I don't want to say like, yeah, it's fun to go out and do the nomadic thing for a while. Right. I just think I've probably maxed it out. I don't know many people who've done it for as long as I have. And there are some downsides to it too. So the logistics of just trying to figure out every night, where am I sleeping? Where am I sleeping? Where am I sleeping? Is difficult.
So what's going to come next for you then?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, that roots question, I'm still trying to solve that. Like, where do I put down some roots? And my goal is to get a home base, of which I'm testing out Denver. But because I like the mountains. Yeah. But the thing is with travel blogging, you know, I'm still traveling a lot. I'm cutting back on it a little bit because I used to travel full time all the time because I had to stay moving. But the idea is if I get a home base, then I can maybe do one trip a month and maybe be gone half the month and then at least come back to the same place where I left from, which is really rare. Yeah. And that way I don't have to take everything. And, you know, it becomes a little easier. So, coming up, I have a lot more trips planned. I'm going to Norway in June, Canada. I have some stuff in California, the whole state of California, Argentina. Yeah. So something every month.
That's amazing. So one of the things that I've noticed that you're passionate about is that on your website, oxworld.com, that you want to share the travel bug with some others, specifically the Niece Project.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about that a little bit? I'm in that situation as well, where I don't have my own offspring. So the closest thing I have is my 2 goddaughters. And yes, I try to inspire this in them. They're fortunate. Their mother is a flight attendant. So they do get some travel perks. But I'm going to be the one to kind of take them on the adventures in some of those situations as well.
It's a whole different relationship they have with you than the way they have with their parents too, which is the fun part. So yeah, I dreamed up the niece project. So I have 6 nieces, no nephews. So it's not that I'm just partial towards girls. I just have 6 nieces. And I decided a long time ago that I wasn't interested in having kids, and that was fine. But I knew that I needed to build a bond with my nieces, because for a lot of different reasons, this was my lifeline. This was my family and my lifeline, the closest thing I was ever going to have to having kids. And as I get older, who's going to be there? It's them. So I wanted to make sure that I had a solid foundation with them. And it's hard because even when I was working in corporate, I always lived somewhere else. So you just go back for like the holidays and stuff like that. And I didn't get to see them that often. So it's very hard to build those bonds that I wanted. And I don't know, probably somewhere 10 years ago, I decided I was done with getting them stuff. Because, you've got graduations and birthdays and Christmas and all this stuff. And I'm just looking at it and going, they don't need anything. I don't want to get them any more stuff. Like nothing I get is going to be that impactful. So I told them all, which probably didn't make much sense at the time, that I wasn't going to get them anything anymore. No more gifts. And instead, when they turned 16 years old, they could choose anywhere they wanted to go in the world, and I would take them. And that was it. That was the rule. And I don't even think they even probably believed me at the time. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But I thought it was so important. As I said, I didn't really have a travel mentor myself. We traveled all over the United States when I was a kid, but I never had a passport until I was 30. And then once I went out of the country, man, my whole world expanded, right? So I wanted to give them that. I wanted to give them that a little earlier. Nice. But it was their choice. So they could have chose New York City. They could have chose, wherever, Disneyland. But the main thing is I wanted it to be their choice. I wanted them to be in this kind of early adulthood where they got the benefit of kind of like this was their first big trip where they were away from home and being adults. So when the first one turned 16, she chose Italy. There's been all kinds of side benefits that I didn't know. Like what started happening shortly after that, it became each one wanted to outdo the other. So the second one went to Vietnam, and we went for like 3 weeks on an Intrepid tour. The third one went to Peru, and we went for 3 weeks, and we volunteered for a week. And this was all her choice. Like they give me the direction and I set it up.
Got it.
Fourth one went to Belize. And the fifth one that I just recently did this December went to New Zealand. So I have one left.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I write about it extensively on the site. It's kind of a whole series that I write, but it's such a growth opportunity for me. And it is different. Like we bond in different ways when we travel together like that.
That sounds amazing. I love it.
It's so special to me. And this last one was so, so good. They push me because I'm getting older too, since the first one. And so like this last one, we went bungee jumping, and it absolutely pushed my limits, but I'm just like, well, I've got to go do this.
Where were you when you went bungee jumping?
In the North Island in New Zealand, Lake Taupo, I think it was.
I have done that. I did Taupo.
Oh my God.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It turned out to be the best thing I did, but it just getting there and walking up to that. And we did it in tandem because I figured,
boy.
Yeah, I kind of had this feeling where I'm like, I can't let her go alone. What if something happens? I'm like, no way. I'm going with her.
I love it.
So yeah. And I can easily say that it was probably both of our favorite experiences. But we did so many great things there together.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, so I want the final inspiration to be what caused you to take that leap, that I'm leaving this job. And it was not, you already said, it wasn't an instant decision. You made the decision and then put 2 years or so into getting the plans ready so that you'd be able to be successful at that.
I didn't have this like big aha moment or horrible thing that happened that made me decide it. In fact, it was a very, very, very slow burn. I had been working without a break for a very long time, meaning like my career wise. I'd take a 2-week vacation and that was about it. And I just started discovering this international travel thing. And I had that bug to go to explore more. So there was that, and I only had 3 weeks of vacation, and they would only let me take 1 week at a time because of my position, which sucked. And so there was a little bit of that. That's kind of what made me think about the travel stuff. But I knew that I needed a break. I needed to reevaluate what I was doing in my life because due to timing and all kinds of things, I kind of fell into this IT career and I was good at it, but I didn't choose it. It chose me in a way, and it was absolutely the right path for me at the time. But after doing it for 14 years, you step back and you have this choice kind of, I was in my mid-30s when I started. So I had this choice of like, do I continue to climb the ladder? Is that what I want to do? Or is this my time to just like go some other direction? And I didn't know what that answer was exactly. And I needed time to back off my routine and be able to think and see some different perspectives and try to figure out what it was that I really wanted. So I knew all of that. And because I'm still a pretty conservative person, I planned way ahead.
Sure, which is great.
Yeah. And I think, and I wasn't happy in my job. I can't say that I was thrilled about it. I was good at it. I did it. They wanted me to stay, but I wasn't happy. And it just felt like a good time to go do these things because I also didn't want to wait for retirement to do all the things I wanted to do because there's no guarantees. And I knew that. And this was just, I felt like taking a year off should not be career defeating. It should be career defining. And it really was. Like, it absolutely was. Because back then in 2006, the idea of taking a career break was pretty unheard of. Now I'm thrilled to say that it's quite popular. But, everyone says, oh, you can't have that gap in your resume. You can't. But I tell you what, it made me one of the most interesting people anyone could ever interview or be around, by going out and doing this and taking that leap. So, and I think the one thing I always say too is that travel, and especially solo travel, gives you all kinds of soft skills that are great to talk about in an interview or whatever, like great to take back to the workplace, things that you're never ever going to really learn in the workplace, but like quick decision making, how you handle yourself under stress, taking smart risks, all of that. Like that is all about solo travel and putting yourself out there. So there's a lot of benefits to it too.
That's awesome. Well, I think you have shared a lot of inspiration with us for today, Sherry. Could you tell people how they could connect with you?
Sure. Lots of different ways, but the main way is probably my blog. So it's otsworld.com. And my blog is full, you'll see, it's full of kind of epic adventures that you can do as a female, whether that's going to Antarctica, hiking the Camino de Santiago, or doing smaller, like just solo road trips. I love solo road trips. And I do have a section on there, if you look, I think, called Epic Adventures. And the Camino de Santiago, I've written kind of a whole series about that if people want to know more about it.
Awesome.
I also have a newsletter there that you can sign up for. I offer like little travel discounts and news and gear updates and things like that, packing stuff. So there's that. And then, of course, social media. So I get a lot of people that like to follow live on some of my trips. So Instagram and Twitter are both at Otsworld, and Facebook is Otsworld Travel.
Perfect. And we'll be putting all of those links in our show notes so people can find you there as well. And where did you say you're off to next?
Norway. So I think we talked about by the time this airs, I will be in the heart of it on a road trip in Norway in Fjordland. And we'll be broadcasting live on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. So if you want to follow along and see what it's like, please do.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for taking your time to share your stories with us today, Sherry.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Sherry shared with us today? One of the things that really resonated with me was how leaving the job and starting to travel made her more interesting and more valuable in future interviews and experiences. Something to keep in mind. So we've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Go to www.transformviatravel.com to join our email list, or follow us on Facebook at Transform Via Travel or on Twitter at Go Solo Live. If you like what you've heard, please invite your friends to listen to Go Solo Live. If you want to be a guest, reach out to me directly at Jennifer@transformviatravel.com. Until next time, remember, go solo, not alone.